Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Ayin Hay of Kiddushin 75. We're going to share my screen. We're on the bottom of Ayin Dalan Bet 74b. And as I mentioned at the end of the day yesterday, we are beginning today with a brisa that details relations that would cause a woman to become disqualified. Our general category is genealogical disqualification. So the major category that many, I guess people would know is mamzer. That's where one has relations with I guess there's a debate. There are three different opinions about it, as we've seen over the last few days. One opinion is that it's any kind of prohibition whatsoever. That's Rabbi Akiva's opinion. There's one opinion that says that it's only things that are prohibited with kares or misas bestin, and then there's one opinion that says no, it's just the situations where it's misas bestin, and we actually choose the middle of those opinions, and we say that if it's chayav kares or misas bestin, if that relationship would result in that prohibition, well then the resulting product will be a mamzer. But there are other qualities that also taint somebody, and one of them that we're talking about now is that if you have a relationship if a woman has a relationship with a certain group of people, well then she will be disqualified from either marrying a Kohen, or if she's the daughter of a Kohen, she will be prohibited from being able to eat truma, even if otherwise she might have been allowed to. So let's take a look, and we'll get that started. So Tana Rabbanan, we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up from the bottom of Ayin Dalan Bet, 3 lines up in the narrow lines of Ayin Dalan Bet of 74b, and we begin as follows. Again, Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a brisa, Ben Tesha Shanim V'Yom Echad, if a boy is 9 years and a day, so Ger Amoni Umoavi Mitzri V'Adomi. So if he is from any of these 4 nations, Ammon and Moab, those 2 nations, we know you are never allowed, as long as it's a boy, to become part of the Jewish people. But an Egyptian and an Edomite, so then Egyptian has to wait 3 generations, and then we have a Kuti, V'Natin, V'Chalo Mamzer, and then you have the other 4 categories where their ancestry is going to be problematic. So Kuti is, we'll see exactly who that is referring to, but they are a group of people that were moved to Israel at the time that the lost tribes were taken away, were moved away, I believe, by Sancherib, and they were put into the land, and they eventually converted, but they converted under questionable circumstances. And so the question is whether or not they're valid conversion. And so as a result, we're not supposed to marry with them. A Natin is a group that tricked the Jewish people into allowing them to convert. And again, we're not sure whether their conversion is valid. A Chalal is a Kohen who became disqualified, either because he's the product of a Kohen with a divorcee, or a Chalutza, or a Kohen Gadol with a widow. But the bottom line is that he's not a kosher Kohen or a mamzer. So if as long as the male is 9 years and a day in any of those categories, Shabo al Kohenes v'al Levia v'al Bas Yisrael, that comes to a female Jew that doesn't have any problems with her lineage, well then Psaluha, then he has caused her. It is a full-fledged relationship. It's considered as if they actually had relations, and as a result, she is now going to be considered disqualified. And again, as Rashi says, second line from the very bottom of Rashi, on Ayin Dalan on Bet Saluha near the end of the line. L'kohenet, she's for a kohenet, l'kohenet min hatruma umin kahuna. She's no longer allowed to have truma, and she's no longer allowed to be part of the kahuna, meaning that she can't marry a kohen. Well, the Yavi Yisraelit, and when it comes to a female Levi or a female Yisrael, Mulin say Aod l'kohen, she can no longer marry a kohen. So that's what we say. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Kol Shazaro Puzzle Posel. No, the situation is not quite as broad as that. It is only when the offspring of the relationship will cause that product to be disqualified, then the child will be then will the woman be disqualified as a result of the relationship. But if their child, if the child that this woman has from having this relationship with any of these categories is not going to disqualify her child, well, then she will not be disqualified either. And we'll see what that is, because it certainly seems like you would think that that's exactly the same grouping as the first category. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, don't focus on any of the children, but rather kol she'atanose bito atanose almanato. It's even a more narrow group. Only if the daughter is going to be prohibited will the will that relationship cause the mother to become a prohibited to marry a kohen and prohibited to have truma, as we start on the Ayin Hey Amud Aleph. V'kol she'iyata nose, and the second line on Ayin Hey Amud Aleph. V'kol she'iyata nose bito, iyata nose almanato. And in any situation where the kohen cannot marry a daughter, so then the kohen would not be permitted to marry the widow either. And so again, we're going to see exactly what the difference is between these categorizations. So Ma'ikal ben Tanakama ben Rabbi Yossi. What's the difference between these two? They seem to be the exact same group, meaning isn't it always tied together whether or not the daughter is prohibited and whether or not the wife would be prohibited? So I'm Rabbi Yochanan Mitzri Sheni Ika Benayu. The situation that differentiates the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi is a Kohen convert. I'm sorry, is an Egyptian a convert who's Egyptian in the second generation, meaning we have a rule that only the third generation of an Egyptian convert is allowed to be married into the rest of the Jewish people. So if we have a second generation convert and he has relationships with a woman, well, then what's the story? Well, let's just work it out. So according to the Tanakama, that relationship is prohibited, and so as a result, that's why the woman will become prohibited to marry a kohen, and she will be prohibited to have truma. But on the other hand, if from the perspective, yeah, we're going to have some Rashi. On the other hand, we have Rabbi Yossi. He focuses on whether or not the child is a problem. If you want to go downstairs, you could go downstairs. So if in fact the child is going to be problematic, so well, when it comes to this child, who's the relationship between this woman and a second generation Egyptian convert, well, that child is not going to have a problem. And so as a result, Rabbi Yossi would say that the woman doesn't have a problem either. And ushnehem lo lemadua elamikoin gadol ba'almana. And both of these were only learned from the relationship between a Kohen Gadol and a widow. The Tanakama savar ki Kohen Gadol ba'almana ma Kohen Gadol ba'almana shibiato ba'avera uposel ba avkol shibiato ba'avera posel. So the Tanakama says, well, let's take a look at the relationship. The relationship of this woman with this Kohen Gadol, of the widow with the Kohen Gadol, is forbidden. And just as that forbidden relationship causes the woman to become unfit to marry a Kohen, so too, any situation where she's having relations that are prohibited, that will cause her to become unfit to marry a Kohen. But Rabbi Yossi says, no, that you're focusing on the wrong aspect of the relationship between a widow and a Kohen Gadol. Rabbi Yossi Savar, Kol Kohen Gadol ba'almana, Ma Kohen Gadol ba'almana shezaro pasul posel. No, what's the problem with the widow and the Kohen Gadol is that the child is unfit. And so af kol shazaro pasol posel. So what matters is, will the child be unfit? And here, the situation of the second generation Egyptian, that child will not be unfit. La fuki mitzri sheni she'ein zaro pasol. The second generation Egyptian convert who has relationships with a Jewish woman, his offspring's not unfit. And so as a result, even though it's prohibited for that woman to have that relationship, that will not cause her to become prohibited to marry a Kohen or to have truma if the situation allowed itself. So Damar Kra, Banim Asher Yivaldu Lahem Dor Shlishi Yavo Lahem B'Kal Hashem. That the children that are born to them, the third generation, they're going to enter into the congregation of Hashem. So that shows that the third generation is not prohibited. And so as a result, this is all fine. Okay, so that's the explanation between the difference between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi. The difference is just one narrow category. If you were to if the woman was to marry or have relations with a second generation Egyptian convert. All right, so what about Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Omer? He said the following: Kol she'atanose bito, atanose almanato. If you're a Kohen and you can marry the daughter, well, then you can marry the widow as well. So v'kol she'iatanose nesbito, iatanose almanato. And if you can't marry the daughter, well, then you can't marry the widow either. So Ma'ika ben Rabbi Yossi, the Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, both of them seem to focus on whether or not the child is problematic. So what's the difference between focusing on the daughter and focusing on any child? So Amar Ula, Ger Amoni Moavi, Ika Benaihu. The difference is an Ammonite or a convert from Ammon or Moab, because such a convert is going to clarify that we're going to have a different situation. Meaning that, let's take a look. We'll do it outside and then we'll look at it inside. So if we have this woman have a relationship with a convert who's from Ammon and Moab, let's say they have a daughter. Well, that daughter is essentially the product of an Ammon and Moabite, but she's from a Ger family. She's from a convert family, and her mother is Jewish. So she is now fully Jewish because she is not because she is allowed to be a woman from Ammon and Moab is allowed to convert into Judaism. And so as a result, she will not be prohibited. And since she's not prohibited, her mother will not suffer the consequences and will not be prohibited to marry a Kohen or eat truma in the appropriate circumstances. So let's take a look at whereas, on the other hand, and that's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. But on the other hand, for Rabbi Yossi, since if the child was a son, the son would be prohibited to marry a Kohen because he would be essentially, again, an Ammon or Moab convert, and an Ammon and Moab convert are never allowed to marry into anyone in any Jew that is a Kohen, Levi, or Yisrael that has unblemished ancestry. So as a result, if they are not going to be allowed to marry a Kohen, and so as a result, based on Rabbi Yossi's principles, the mother would be prohibited to marry a Kohen, and the mother would be prohibited to eat truma again if appropriate. So the Rabbi and now let's take a look at it inside. The Rabbi Yossi savar ki Kohen gadol ba'amana, and again ushnehem lo lamadua ela Kohen gadol ba'amana, and again each one is learning their position from a Kohen gadol who marries a widow. The Rabbi Yossi savar ki Kohen gadol ba'amana ma Kohen gadol ba'amana shazaro pasol uposel av kol zo shazaro pasol uposel. So just as we saw before, the Rabbi Yossi says that what's the problem? The problem is that if you have a situation where the relationship will result in a defective product, meaning a offspring that is not fit to marry a Kohen, or it could result in that outcome, well, then in that case, the relationship itself is going to cause the woman to not be able to marry a Kohen or continue to eat truma. And similarly, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says with respect to a Kohen Gadol with a widow. And by the way, and again, from Rabbi Yossi's perspective, if there's a relationship with an Ammon or Moab convert, it's going to be a problem because if the offspring is male, that offspring is going to be puzzle and for a relationship with a Kohen, and therefore the mother will also be. But according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, no. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, "B'kohen gadol ba'almana." No, ma kohen gadol ba'almana shekol zaro pasul. Kol shezaro pasul afilu nekevos. You need even the women to be unfit, and that comes to exclude lafuki ger Ammoni u'Moavi. This comes to exclude the Ammonite and Moabite convert because the nekevos havu ksheris lavo bakal, because their children are allowed to marry into the community and even to marry a Kohen. The Amarmar Ammoni below Ammonite, Moavi below Moavite. That is the situation. That's why, of course, David HaMelech, whose ancestor is Ruth HaMoavi, that's how he's considered legitimate because he's allowed to marry. She's allowed to convert, and she's not going to taint the descendants. So Amarav Chesta Kol Modin Balmana Isa Shipsul Kuna. All right. Oh, so sorry. That's down. We go to a new category, a new discussion, and now we're going to talk about the interesting case of an Almana Isa. Now we saw this situation of Almanas Isa in Ketubot, but I don't expect you to remember it because I couldn't remember it either. So what is this Almana Isa? So dough is something where you've got a lot of ingredients mixed up, and we have a debate between Rashi and Tosos as to what it is. We'll start with Rashi's interpretation. So let's read the first part of Rashi, Amanat Isa. It's 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 11 lines down in the narrow lines on Ayin Hey Amid Aleph, Almanas Isa, B'Ketuvot, in Ketuvot, Daf Yudalat Amid Aleph, Mefarish Almanat. So yeah, if you want to go down, you can go down now. Almanat Safek. When it comes to you can go down now. So when it comes to a widow who's in an uncertain situation, where Almanat Safek Chalal, a widow who was married to an uncertain chalal. So we had this person, right? So how did this person become a Safek chalal? So he was the product of a Kohen who married somebody who might be divorced, but we're not sure. We're not sure whether she was divorced or whether she is a widow. So how could that happen? So the classic case is where a man throws a get to his wife, and we're not clear whether the get landed closer to him or closer to her. So she's suffix subject to having been divorced, and then the man drops dead. So there's no question that she's allowed to go out and marry someone new. The issue is that if she's a divorcee, she's not allowed to marry a Kohen. But if she's not a divorcee, if she's a widow, she would be allowed to marry a Kohen. Now, if that woman were to marry a Kohen and to have a son, that son would be a Safek Chalal. So now we have, and then that son marries a wife, and now that wife, and now that son dies, and so now we have a widow from a Safek Chalal. Shahaita Mu'urevet, the Sveikot, because we have her now mixed up in a bunch of Sveikot. That's why it's called an Almanas Isa, and we're going to deal with the second half of Rashi in a moment. Okay, so let's take a look, and we'll get going on with the details. So we have Amar Rav Chisda Kol Modim back in the Gemara. So we're now end of the third to last narrow line in the Gemara, beginning of the second to last narrow line. So Amar Rav Chisda Hakol Modim be'Amanas Isa Shipsula Lakuna. Everybody agrees that this woman is unfit to marry a Kohen. Now we're going to see that in fact that is not the case. But what he means when he says everyone is he means everyone of the Tanaim that we just had in our Brisa. So what he's referring to is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Yossi, and the Tanakama. So man meko bahani tanai. What's my proof that this is right? Because Rav Chisda notes, how do I know that all of them? Because which of the Tanaim is the most lenient? Obviously, it's Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, because Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was the one that says that if the woman has relations with a convert from Ammon or Moab, or relations with a second generation Egyptian, in all of those situations, the woman herself will be fit. But what about in this situation? The Ka'amar, right? And what did Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel say? The Ka'amar kol she'ata nose bita va'ata nose almanato. Wherever you can marry the daughter, you can marry a Kohen can marry the daughter. The Kohen can marry the widow as well. Because she'ata nose bito, i'ata nose almanato. And wherever you can't marry the daughter, you can't marry the widow. Well, let's take a look at this situation. Lamute mai. What is this coming to tell us that that the Kohen can't do? Lamute almanas isa shepsula kuna. This shows that a almanas isa, this woman who married, the widow of a Suffolk Chalal, she's not going to be allowed to marry a Kohen. Because how do I know that? Because let's take a look at that woman's daughter. If that woman has relations with a Yisrael, that daughter is going to be also a Suffolk Chalala. And so as a result, she will not be able to marry a Kohen. So as a result, this woman herself is not allowed to marry a Kohen. That's exactly what we said. That's the rule. So levafuke midahane tonight. So it comes to, and that position is different from the following position, because ditnan Hayid Rabbi Yoshua Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. This, of course, Mishnah comes from Ediot. That's why it begins with the testimony. So Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira testified al amanas isa shekasher lekahuna, that a widow of an uncertain chalal, that's going to be a situation she will be allowed to marry a Kohen. Well, 1 second, my timer. Why is it? Havi svek sveka, usvek sveka lakula, that this is a double doubt, and as a result, the double doubt, we're going to treat it leniently. So let's take a look and think about this. We're talking about somebody who is a Suffolk Chalal. That is a single suffix. So how in the world did we end up with two svekot from this one suffix of dealing with a Suffolk Chalal? So Rashi now, back into Rashi, Amanas Isa. So now again, we're about 3, 6, 9, 13 lines down, maybe 14 lines down. So Ba'ala Haya suffix. Her husband was the suffix. Vihi Ba Mikocho. And her uncertain situation came from him. So it wasn't a directly suffix. It's not that the suffix was about her, but rather it came indirectly. And so therefore, Dahavya la Svek Sveka. And therefore, we're going to call that like a Svek Sveka. Now, Tosos, not here, but in Ketubot, says, no way. That's not, that no one could possibly call that a Svek Sveka. And so as a result, Tosos offers a different explanation. Tosos says that we're dealing with a situation where we had a suffix chalal. So again, same situation, except that we don't know whether this particular husband that this particular woman had is the suffix chalal in the family. So basically what happened is the following. We had a number of brothers. One of them became a suffix chalal. And one of them was a suffix chalal. But we don't know, and we no longer remember which of the brothers was a suffix chalal. And now we're looking at one of the descendants of that, of those families. And so now all of a sudden we have relatives that are basically a svek sveka as to whether or not they're a suffix chalal. So we have one suffix of whether or not this is actually a descendant of the problematic suffix chalal, and of course we have the uncertainty of whether this suffix chalal was a chalal in the first place. So therefore, that's why Tosos would say that this is a situation of that we're going to be lenient according to that opinion, and that is why we're going to, and that is why he interprets it in this way. Okay, so now we're ready to continue on, and we're going to go back to quote our Mishnah. Now, our Mishnah, I didn't mention this yesterday, but I should have, and that is our Mishnah says Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer, but it could be that, and then it may be that it's actually supposed to be Elazar. Here, too, in this discussion, immediately we're going to see that they're going to use the term name Rabbi Eliezer. That's fine. But in the next Gemara, we're going to see that they're going to use the term Rabbi Elazar. So according to the notes here, it probably should be Rabbi Elazar here and in the Mishnah, because that's the most likely identity of who it was. But in any event, let's jump on what he said. So what did he say? He said that a situation, that the only situation where two people can marry is when both of their circumstances are certain. But if their circumstances are not certain, well, then they would not be allowed to marry. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, halacha Rabbi Eliezer. The halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Elazar. I'll probably switch between them. So Ki Amrita Kamei de Shmuel Amarli. But when I said that the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer in front of Shmuel, he said to me the following: Hillel Hillel taught the following brisa. Asara, which is also part of one of our I think the opening Mishnah of the parak. Asara yuchsin alu mibavel v'kula mutaran lavo bazeh bazeh. We have 10 different kinds of classes of genealogy, meaning that depending on the situation, that's how 10 categories, and all of them can marry one another. Now, the literal that it says literally that all of them can marry one another, but that obviously cannot be the case. And so let's take a look in Rashi Hillel Shona. So Mishnah Achap Mishana Achap Brisa that he taught in one Brisa Asara Yuchsin Kulo, or the language that we just said. The Kol HaAsurin Shebehen Mutaran Lavo Zebezeh. And Rashi explains that what we mean when they can all marry one another is that all the ones that are forbidden, they are all able to marry one another. So Va'at Amrat Halacha Rabbi Eliezer. So how in the world, given that Hillel taught this brisa and was clearly of the opinion that they're allowed to marry one another, namely that, and who do these categories include? They include the Asufi and the Sfuki. So how can you possibly say that where their situation is uncertain? So how can you possibly say that they're not allowed to marry one another, and that the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer? So, and not only that, so not only did we have, so now that we frame this, so we have this debate between Rav and Shmuel. Rav says that the halacha is you have to, only certain can marry certain, and Shmuel says no, as long as they're in a prohibited category, they can marry one another. Rami de Rav, but we have a debate, we have an internal inconsistency within Rav. Rami de Shmuel, and we have an internal inconsistency with respect to Shmuel, to Itmar, because we have the following statement. Arusa she'ibra, if you have a woman who has done Kiddushin, and she now becomes pregnant. Rav Amar Havlad Mamzer. Rav says the child is a mamzer. Tough luck. Sorry, you're not allowed to have relations, because after all, most of the world is prohibited to her. So, and at the moment, we'll just assume that we're talking about a situation where she is not sure how she, who the parent is. So, Shmuel Amar, no, Havlad Shtuki. The Vlad is a suffix mamzer. We have to be quiet about it. We don't know who the father is, but it's not worse than that. It's not like we know that the father is the wrong person. And so as a result, it's not as bad. So those are but the problem is, Rav Amar Havlad mamzer umuter mivamzeret. What's the implication of saying that the Rav that it's a mamzer? Well, then it would be permitted to marry a female mamzer, and that would contradict the Rav statement of that the halacha follows Rabbi Eliezer, because really this child is a suffix mamzer, not a definite mamzer, and so as a result, how could we allow this suffix mamzer to marry a mamzeret? Ushmuel Amar Havlad Shtuki v'asur b'mamzer. Well, and Shmuel seems to be saying that the child is a shtuki and not allowed to marry a mamzeret. And the problem is Shmuel was the one who says that the halacha is not like Rabbi Eliezer, that all the different classes can marry one another. So that seems to be a problem. So we're going to give a few different answers to this. So the answer number one is simply ipuch, reverse it. That Rav Amar Havlad Shtuki, Shmuel Amar Havlad Mamzer. So Tartalamili, why do I need to teach both teachings if in fact, why do we need to have Rav and Shmuel debate this both in a general situation and in a situation where the girl is has done Kiddushin, has done Erisin. So Sricha, we need it. We need to have both. Di it marbaha, because if we had only taught me this with respect to any kind of woman, bahakam mishum derov ksherim. It's only because most of the women in the world are permitted to her that we, even though she's a shtuki, that we're going to call her a shtuki and therefore have a suffix about her. Aval hasam, but in a situation where the woman is actually already engaged and has done erisin / kedushin, well, to rob psulim mitzvah, where now most of the world is unfit to her. Ema moti de Shmuel. Maybe he would agree with Shmuel and say that the child is in fact a full-fledged mamzer who would of course be able to marry a mamzeret. And if you had only said the situation with the girl who has already, the woman who has already done erisin / kedushin, so maybe bahakam, maybe it's only there that we'll say that we'll call the child a shtuki and say that there's an uncertainty, because at least there's somebody clear that we should be able to point to who probably is the one who made her pregnant, because she's engaged to him, or she's done erisin and kedushin with him. Well, aval baha, but in the case where it's just a random woman and we don't know who the father is, Ema Modi Shmuel, maybe he'll agree to Shmuel that we'll just treat her as a mamzer, and therefore, because after all, it could be a mamzer, and we have no idea, and so maybe we'll say that he agrees. So tzricha, therefore, we need to have both disputes. The e-bias ema, so that's answer number one. So, but answer number two is the following: the e-bias ema olam lo table. Don't switch it around. Don't reverse the rulings. And what will I say? Umay mamzer dekamarav. What does it mean when we say that the child is a mamzer? Lav mutter b'mamzeret. It does not mean that the child is able to marry a mamzer. Ela de asur b'vas Yisrael. Rather, she's prohibited to marry any daughter of Israel. Ushmuel Amar Havlad Shtuki. Whereas Shmuel says the child is a shtuki. Now we're going to spend the rest of the time, or much of the rest of today, now 5 answers as what does that mean that Shmuel is going to say that it's a shtuki. So answer number one is Da'asr B'vas Yisrael, and it's also a shtuki that it would be prohibited to marry a daughter of Israel. 1 second, well, if that's true, Ihachi Hainu Derav. That's the same effective opinion as Rav. What is their dispute about? So Ella my shtuki. So rather, we're going to change the meaning of shtuki. Rather, it's shemishatkin oto midin kahuna. We're going to say that this child that is produced from this is not allowed to marry a kohen. But again, that's a problem because pshita, that's obvious. Of course, a child that has this blemish in his ancestry is not going to be allowed to marry a Kohen. Hashda Medin Yisrael Meshatkin Lay. We already prevent him from marrying a Jewish woman who's a Yisrael. Medin Kahuna Mi Boy. Do you need to tell me that he can't marry a Kohen? Of course he can. So Elamai Shtuki Shemishatkin Oto Minixeyaviv. We'll say that he's not allowed to claim his father's possessions as part of inheritance. Well, again, Pshita, that's obvious. Mia Dinan Avunumao, Manu, do we know even who his father is? He's not even sure know who his father is. So tzrichut lo tzrichut tafas. We're talking about a situation where he grabbed it. So as a result, maybe we would say that possession is 9/10 of the law, and therefore we wouldn't allow him to get it back. And the answer is no. We say that the estate can take back the property because this is an improper claim, because he doesn't know who his father is for sure, and therefore that's what we were talking about. So that's answer number 3 as to what we mean by shtuki, and that actually works. Now we're going to give 2 more answers, I believe, or at least one more answer. Excuse me, one more answer. So a 4th answer. My shtuki beduki. When we say shtuki, again, as we saw in a Mishnah a few Mishnayos ago, that shtuki can be referred to as a beduki, meaning that you check, you ask the mother. So here, Shabotkin et imo v'omeres l'kasher nivalti ne'emenes. If you ask her and she says that she had relations with somebody who had proper genealogy, who didn't have a blemish in their genealogy, so then we'll believe her and the child will be kosher. So come on, who does this follow? Rabban Gamliel. This is like Rabban Gamliel, as we saw in the Mishnah that we cited yesterday. Hamar Shmuel Chadazimna. But that's we already said that, because we look at the Shmuel already told us that the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel. So what's he telling us new here? And here we're going to quote the Mishnah that we cited yesterday, and that has Shmuel saying again that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So let's take a look, and Rabbi Gamliel, excuse me. So if we find a woman is pregnant and we ask her, what's the story with this child? And she answers that she's from this particular person who's a Kohen. Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer, Omrim, Ne'emenes, we say she's believed. Rabbi Yeshua Omer Eino Nemenes, and Rabbi Yeshua says we are not believed. And Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, halacha to Rabbi Gamliel. So we already know the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel according to Shmuel. So why do I need a second statement? Here we have, again, in the case that we had in the Mishnah just cited, where the case was with a woman who was not necessarily married at all. But the case that we had a moment ago was a woman who had done erisin. So tzricha, we need to teach both of them. Because if I only had the situation over there that we learned in Ketubot, where it was talking about a woman who was not necessarily married, havamina hasam rov ksherim, that's because most women could be married, could have had relations with her, and would not have caused her child to be unfit. But here, where the woman has already done erisin / Kiddushin, where most men in the world would be prohibited to her, indeed every man in the world other than the man with whom she had erisin / Kiddushin, aimalo, I might think otherwise. So tzricha, therefore I need to teach us this law. Okay, so next line in the, so again, continuing to elaborate on Rabbi Lazar's teaching in our Mishnah, another situation that relations would not be allowed according to Rabbi Elazar or / Rabbi Eliezer. So Tanya B'chein Rabbi Elazar Omer, Rabbi Elazar also taught not only that you can't have a definite with an uncertain situation, which is what he taught in our Mishnah, but also kuti lo yisa kuti. One kuti is not allowed to marry another. So my taima, what's the reason? Now here we're going to give 5 reasons, but I will note that we're only going to give 3 of them today, and all 3 will be rejected. So we're going to. I'm already giving you the heads up that if you are looking for a cliffhanger, the cliffhanger is what's the actual reason for Rabbi Elazar's ruling that a kuti can't marry a kuti. So let's take a look and see what are the 3 rejected reasons. So Rabbi Yosef starts asuhu kiger la'achar asar doros. The point is that Rabbi Elazar is treating a kuti like a convert after 10 generations. Well, what's the story with the convert after 10 generations? Now, when we say that, what we mean is a situation where 2 converts marry, and then their child continues to marry a convert for 10 generations. In that situation, the issues of a convert could potentially continue to apply to later generations, and so as a result, they might not be allowed to marry a Kohen. And here's the brisa that says essentially that ger adasar doros muter b'mamzeret, a convert for 10 generations is able to marry a mamzeret. Mikan ve'elach asar mamzeret. But from that point on, he's prohibited. Why? V'yesh omrim ad sheyishtakaya shame avodas kochavim mimenu. That the situation is only until the attitude and reputation of idolatry disappears from him. Meaning, if people aren't saying, "Oh, that family is a convert family," which of course they shouldn't be saying in the first place, but if they were to be saying that, if there's no kind of statement on that at all, well, then that will be when they will no longer be allowed to marry a mamzeret. And why not? Because of course we're concerned that people might think that this person is not in fact from a convert family, but is a full-fledged Jew. And so as a result, people will think that all of a sudden Jews are allowed to marry mamzerim. So Amrle Abaye, 1 second. Abaye says to Rav Yosef, this is not a good comparison. Midami, are they comparable? Hasam ger yashan umamzeres chadasha. The situation over there is you have a convert who's converted a long time ago, and therefore his whole situation was forgotten. But the mamzeret is a new one, meaning we know that this is a mamzer. So that's not a comparable case of a kuti and a kuti. A kuti and a kuti is almost like a situation of two old converts marrying, where we don't know what the story is. So Amrei Bar Yisrael, who decaught nasiv mamzeres. People will, and again, Abaye explains that in that situation, people will think that a regular kosher Yisrael is marrying a mamzeret. But hacha idi ki hadadi ninhu. But here, the two kutim are alike. There shouldn't be any reason to not allow them to marry. So we go to the second answer, and here we have Rav Dimi. Elakiyasa Rav Dimi Amar, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babel, he explained Rabbi Elazar Savar La Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Elazar is thinking like Rabbi Yishmael. As we turn to Ayin Hey Amabed, Rabbi Yishmael Savar La Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yishmael, thinks like Rabbi Akiva. What are we talking about? Well, here are the two opinions. Rabbi Elazar Savar La Rabbi Yishmael, the Amar Kutim Geri Arayosheim. That according to Rabbi Yishmael, the Kutim were never valid converts in the first place, so they are effectively not Jewish. Rabbi Yishmael Savar Lak Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Yishmael thinks like Rabbi Akiva. The Amar Ovid Kochavim the Evid Haba Al Bas Yisrael Havlad Mamzer. That when a Jew marries a non-Jew, that child becomes a Jewish woman marries a non-Jewish man. That child is a mamzer. And so as a result, that's why a kuti can't marry a kuti, because it's basically, maybe there's a Jewish aspect to this person. And so as a result, and maybe he's not Jewish at all. And so as a result, we're worried that we're going to end up creating a mamzer situation. So Umi Saba, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva. Well, 1 second. But does Rabbi Yishmael actually hold like Rabbi Akiva? In fact, he does not, because Vahama Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yishmael, it was said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, Minayin la'ovid kochavim ve'evid shebo al kohenes va'al leviyah va'al bas Yisrael shipsalua. How do I know that if a non-Jew has relations with a Jewish woman, whether she's a Kohen, Levi, or Yisrael, that she becomes unfit to marry a Kohen? Shneamar uvas Kohen ki tiyeh almana ugrusha v'zera ein la. That, when a daughter of a Kohen, if she becomes a widow or divorcee, and she has no children, so then she goes back to her father's house. Mishi yeshlo almanut ugreshut v'gerushin. It's only if she has relations with somebody from whom she could be a widow or a divorcee. But yatsa ovid kochavim ve'evid she'ein lo almanut v'gerushin. But it's not true for somebody who does not. But the point is that clearly Rabbi Yishmael does not believe that the child is a mamzer, because if he believed that the child was a mamzer, well, then he wouldn't have to cite this pasuk for the basis for her to be prohibited. He would be able to point to the fact that the outcome is prohibited. The child is prohibited. And whenever we have a child who's prohibited, as we saw earlier, so too the mother will be prohibited to marry a Kohen. So v'isal kadaitak savar like Rabbi Akiva, hashta mamzer havi mifsal b'viyatomi boy. Meaning, once the child is a mamzer, well, then she's certainly going to be herself unfit. So you wouldn't have needed to cite a pasuk So as a result, again, the second answer that we offered doesn't work. And so therefore we offer a third possibility. Ella Rabbi Lazar Savar Lak Rabbi Shmuel. Amar Kutim Geri Arayot. So maybe it is that Rabbi Lazar, who says Kutim can't marry Kutim, he thinks like Rabbi Shmuel. This Savar Lak Rabbi Akiva. So let's cut out the middleman. It's not that Rabbi Lazar thinks like Rabbi Shmuel, who thinks like Rabbi Akiva. It's Rabbi Lazar thinks like both Rabbi Shmuel and like Rabbi Akiva. But there doesn't have to be consistency between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. He just happens to hold like Rabbi Shmuel in one case and Rabbi Akiva in the other. But 1 second, even that doesn't work because Umi Sabra La Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Akiva. Does Rabbi Lazar actually hold like Rabbi Akiva? Bahama Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar. Afal Pisha Nechlaku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel Betsaros. Even though Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel disagreed with respect to co-wives, that Beis Hillel says that as long as you have one co-wife who can't do yibum, all the other co-wives are free. But Beis Shammai says no, only the co-wife whose problem is free. So modim she'ein, but both of them agree. Modim she'ein mamzer elam mimi isuro isur erva va'anush koris. They agree that the prohibition of causing a mamzer only is where the prohibition is a kares prohibition, and so as a result, they would not again. And this is Rebbe Lazar saying this. Rebbe Lazar is saying that the halacha is not like Rabbi Akiva, that a mamzer cannot happen from a Jewish woman having relations with a non-Jewish man. That is not considered a mamzer. So we have eliminated 3 answers, and if you want to hear answer number 4 and answer number 5, you're going to need to stay tuned to tomorrow's daf. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom, a wonderful day, a wonderful weekend, and may we celebrate Smachot, and may our Jewish soldiers come home safe, and may all the hostages be freed as soon as possible and in good health. I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbos.
I mean, the question here is, why are we even bothering to discuss Samaritans? They certainly aren't going to listen to the rabbis.
Well, remember, the issue isn't meaning, and of course, akuti. Why do we even care about that?
Right.
That is a good question. I'll have to think about that. I'll have to think about that. Why do we now? It could be that even if they're not going to listen to us, we have to know the halacha associated with the relationship. But there must be something. There must be something. I guess here's a possibility.
A Samaritan who converts to Judaism, what's his real status?
Yes, that is the question. Does he get tainted? So if a kuti becomes a full-fledged convert, if in fact there is not a kuti relationship historically, meaning if they've always married, if the women have always been non-kutim,
it's very rare. They don't take a lot of converts.
Yes, exactly. But if you had that situation, well, then a kuti that converted. Well, actually, the other question is that then the kuti who converted, you might be able to be a full-fledged Jew. But so that was what I was thinking exactly along those lines. That if you have a kuti who wants to do tshuva, so then would they be, who would they be allowed to marry? Would it affect who they can marry? That's what occurs to me at the moment. I'll have to give it some more thought. And
in practice, they almost never convert out.
Well, but it's not a particularly large community. It's something like a few hundred at the moment.
It's actually increased to about 800, I understand.
Okay, well,
and another interesting thing is they no longer have priests.
They don't. They meaning that all the priests died out, or all
the priests died out. They have Levites.
Oh wow!
But they don't have. But they're sometime in the Middle Ages, all their priests died out.
Oh no!
Yeah, Professor Fine edited a book about them, and there was a great exhibition about them. And I actually met a Samaritan, one of the leaders of the community.
Cool.
which is interesting. I've never met a Karaite, but I met a Samaritan. He was extremely happy to have a Jew being interested enough in Samaritans to go to Washington to the exhibition, and the book that Professor Fine edited as well. In fact, I think I even have it right here.
Yeah.
The Yeah, right here.
Awesome. Awesome.
It's well worth
Yeah.
it's well worth reading. They are
And I
definitely
think that book has a lot
monotheists.
of pictures in it, right? That big book is that
Yes,
it has some cool pictures of of them, right? They go to Har Eval, right?
they actually live there, live on Mount Gerizim now.
Yeah.
They moved from Nablus for their safety, and they now live on the mountain. They 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 actually sacrifice lambs on Pesach, and they welcome people to visit and watch the ceremony.
Wow.
And we, of course, we have a mission in Kulin that prohibits from eating their Korban Pesach, but they are very happy to have others come and view. They do take a few converts, mostly women, not very many. I've never heard of a Samaritan becoming a Jew. Um, and the Israeli government tries to protect them. And it's interesting, between 1948 and 1967, the only people who are allowed to cross the Green Line between Israel proper and the area that was ruled by Jordan were the Samaritans.
Wow. Wow.
It was actually part of the
Sure.
Armistice Agreement.
That's cool. All right. Have
Because
a
there
great
are
day,
a number who
everybody.
live in Holon in Israel as well.
Awesome. All
Yeah.
right.
So
Have a good Shabbos.
yeah, good Shabbos.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.